A wallpaper had this June 6, 2022. Had this set today wallpaper does have on Patteera collection. Had this set today wallpaper has the June 6, 2022. This one has garbage report has on Patteera. Had this now has June 2nd, 2022. Alright, this one has the set today wallpaper. Had this June 2nd, 2022. Had this third lieutenant and on Patteera. This one is not working. Has set today wallpaper. Had this now has June 1st, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today wallpaper. Had this June 1st, 2022. Had this set today wallpaper. This one also has third lieutenant and on Patteera. This one is not working. Had this now has video has May 31st, 2022. This one had this set today wallpaper. Had this May 31st, 2022. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this third lieutenant and on Patteera. This one does have on Patteera. Had this May 31st, 2022. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this now has May 27, 2022. Alright, this one had the set today wallpaper. Had this May 27, 2022. Had this Chumpu Tasita and on Patteera. This one is not working. Had this one has on Patteera. This one does. Had this now has May 26, 2022. Alright, this one had the set today wallpaper. Had this May 26, 2022. Had this Chumpu Tasita and on Patteera. This one also. This one is not working. Had this Chumpu Tasita and on Patteera. Had this now has May 25th, 2022. Alright, this one had the set today wallpaper. Had this May 25th, 2022. Had this third lieutenant and on Patteera. This one is not working. Had this third lieutenant and on Patteera. This one does. This now has video has May 24th, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today wallpaper. Had this May 24th, 2022. Had this third lieutenant and on Patteera. This one is not working. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this now had this May 23rd, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today wallpaper. Had this May 23rd, 2022. Had this third lieutenant and on Patteera. This one working. Had this third lieutenant and on Patteera. Had this now has this May 11, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today wallpaper. Had this May 11, 2022. Had this garbage report has on Patteera. Had this set today wallpaper. This one does have on Patteera. Had this May 11, 2022. Had this now has this May 3rd, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today wallpaper. Had this May 3rd, 2022. Had this garbage report has on Patteera. This one does have on Patteera. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this May 3rd, 2022. Had this now has April 28, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today wallpaper. Had this April 28, 2022. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this third lieutenant garbage report has on Patteera. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this April 28, 2022. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this now has video has 27 April 2022. Alright, this one had this set today wallpaper. Had this 27 April 2022. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this garbage report has on Patteera. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this 27 April 2022. Had this set today wallpaper. Alright, this one. Yes. This one had this set today wallpaper. This one had this set today. This now has, oh, good. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this 27th April 2022. Had this now has April 25th, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today wallpaper. Had this April 25th, 2022. Had this on Patteera. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this April 25th, 2022. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this now has April 21st, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today wallpaper. Had this April 21st, 2022. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this garbage report has on Patteera. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this April 21st, 2022. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this now has April 8, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today wallpaper. Had this April 8, 2022. Had this garbage report has on Patteera. Had this on Patteera has facial, has wallpaper, has yellow. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this April 8, 2022. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this now has had this April 7, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today wallpaper. Had this April 7, 2022. Had this garbage report has on Patteera. This one is not working. Had this April 7, 2022. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this garbage report has on Patteera. This one is not working. Had this now has April 5th, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today wallpaper. Had this April 5th, 2022. Had this garbage report has on Patteera. This one is not working. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this garbage report has on Patteera. Had this now has May 31st, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today wallpaper. Had this March 31st, 2022. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this garbage report has on Patteera. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this March 31st, 2022. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this on Patteera. Has garbage report. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this now has March 30, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today wallpaper. Had this March 30, 2022. Had this time selected and on Patteera. This one is not working. Had this time selected and on Patteera. This one does. Had this set today wallpaper. Had this now has had this forgot it has this March 24th. Had this March 24th, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today wallpaper. Had this March 24th, 2022. Had this garbage report has on Patteera. This one is not working. Had this had this Doratan out, had this garbage one has on Patteera, this one does. Had this now has this March 23rd, 2022. This one has March 24th, 2022. This one has this now has March 23rd, 2022. Alright, this one had the set today. Wallpaper had this March 23rd, 2022. Had this Doratan and on Patteera. This one is not working. Had this Doratan and on Patteera. This one does. This one is not working. Had this Doratan and on Patteera. This one does. Had this now has this March 18, 2022. Alright, this one had the set today. Wallpaper had this March 18, 2022. Had this garbage one has on Patteera. Had this set today. Wallpaper had this March 18, 2022. Had this set today. Wallpaper had this garbage one has on Patteera. Had this set today. Wallpaper had this March 18, 2022. Had this now has video has March 17, 2022. Alright, this one had the set today. Wallpaper had this March 17, 2022. Had this garbage one has on Patteera. Oh, this one had the set today. Wallpaper had this March 17, 2022. Had this on Patteera, has fashion, has tiger. Had this set today. Wallpaper had this garbage one has on Patteera. Had this March 17, 2022. Had this now has March 16, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today. Wallpaper had this March 16, 2022. Had this set today. Wallpaper had this Doratan and on Patteera. Had this March 16, 2022. Had this set today. Wallpaper had this now has March 10, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today. Wallpaper had this March 10, 2022. Had this garbage report has on Patteera. Oh, this one had the set today. Wallpaper had this March 10, 2022. Had this on Patteera. Had this set today. Wallpaper had this March 10, 2022. Had this now has this March 8, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today. Wallpaper had this March 8, 2022. Had this Chompu Tasita and on Patteera. Had this set today. Wallpaper had this Chompu Tasita and on Patteera. Had this set today. Wallpaper had this now had this March 7, 2022. Alright, this one had this set today. Wallpaper had this March 7, 2022. Had this March 7, 2022. Had this Doratan and on Patteera. Had this set today. Wallpaper had this March 7, 2022. This now had the last one I have has March 2nd, 2022. Alright, this one had the set today. Wallpaper. Say the last one I have had the set today. Wallpaper had this March 2nd, 2022. Had this Doratan and on Patteera. Had the set today. Wallpaper. This one had this not working. This one is not working. Had this March 2nd, 2022. Had this set today. Wallpaper. Had this Doratan and on Patteera. This one does. Had this March 2nd, 2022. This one is not working. So, thanks for watching. Has said today. Wallpaper. Had this, forgot videos. Had this June 6, 2022 to has March 2nd, 2022. So, thanks for watching.